And welcome in to the Full-Time Fantasy Podcast. I'm Bradley Stalder. I'll be hosting tonight, and along with me, Jody Smith. Jody, it's been a crazy free agency time. How are you doing? What's been up with you here in full time?
Baseball. Editing a lot of baseball content. Sean's back on the full time team now. He's a NFBC Hall of Fame baseball analyst, and he is a machine. And I've been putting up a lot of baseball stuff and my own baseball rankings. Surprisingly, I submitted baseball rankings to Fantasy Pros last year. Finished 17th, which is pretty respectable out of I don't know 60 people, whatever it was. But I don't give much baseball advice. I'm not known as that. I'm a football straight person, strictly football person. But baseball's always been my game. I've always been a huge Astros fan, so something I need to delve into a little bit more.
How's my Cleveland team looking?
The Guardians, I wanted to call them the Indians. They look fine. I mean, that's an interesting division, hard to predict. It's one of them ones. It's kind of like the NL Central too, where you're just not sure who's going to come out of those. They bounce back and forth, but I think they're in good shape.
Yeah, they're a young team, made the playoffs last year. We'll see if the moves that they
I
made
wish
this
there was
year.
I wish there was a way we could schedule a game when we're all in Ohio here coming up in August. That there was a game that we could go check it out. I'd like to check out other parks, but I already looked at the schedule. And for those of us that are going to be busy doing Kings Classic and other things, part of the FF Expo, it's just not going to work.
Yeah, it's a tight schedule, tight turnaround, and the FF Expo is a lot of fun, and there's a lot of activities planned for everybody there. So Jody and I have hung out a couple times over the last few years, along with our friend Billy, and so I've taken over the hosting reins, I guess, for right now, and hosting here for the Full-Time Fantasy Podcast. But Jody, let's jump into the first, or I guess a most recent move, and that was an Elijah Moore trade to the Cleveland Browns. The Browns got Moore and a third-round pick in exchange for a second-round pick this year. Is this going to be a good enough fresh start for Elijah Moore in Cleveland with Deshaun Watson and only really competing with Amari Cooper and David Njoku?
Oh, I guess that kind of depends, because you want to say if Aaron Rodgers ends up going to New York, you kind of figure we would like to see what Elijah Moore could do with an actual credible quarterback. But I think the writing's been on the wall that he needs a fresh start. He was clamoring for a trade throughout all of last year. And, he's been, an interesting one here in fantasy, because we all kind of loved Elijah Moore. If you go back and look at a lot of preseason lists like here, he's listed as a sleeper, as a breakout candidate, as a undervalued draft player. And, we also know how that turned out. You look more to his rookie season when he was averaging 49 yards a game and actually scored 5 times with Joe Flacco. You wonder last year's complete collapse, how much of it had to do with Zach Wilson. I'm going to guess a whole bunch. He had 9 games with fewer than 20 receiving yards. I mean, that's not all your quarterback, because Garrett Wilson, turned out to be just fine. So I figure in Cleveland, it'll be good to have a fresh start. Maybe, hopefully, it helps him. It helps motivate him. And I figure he's going to actually start on a perimeter opposite of Amari Cooper. What they used last year, well, I guess it depends. They'll move their guys around, but what you saw last year was David Bell, I think, was a 50% slot rate. So we're going to have to see. Cooper will play in a slot a little bit, but Elijah Moore, to me, is more of a field stretcher kind of guy. So we'll see how he does with a fresh start. But it definitely will be, the best quarterback that he's ever played with in his career. So I'm optimistic that, he'll rebound. And I guess if he could get his rookie numbers come back, I think that would be a fair estimate.
Yeah, Elijah Moore, bulletproof prospect coming out of Ole Miss. Jody mentioned earlier that we really liked his rookie year. There was a game against Indianapolis, who back in 2021 had a really good defense. He finished as the wide receiver 1 in one of those weeks, like overall. And so we've seen his upside. It's a matter of, is Deshaun Watson going to give us a bounce back year after a tough sledding, coming back from his suspension. I also think, and Jody, I'd like your take on this too. Maybe this pushes out a pedestrian Donovan Peoples-Jones from the rotation. Do you think that's going to be an immediate thing? Or do you think that that's just going to be an ongoing battle between Peoples-Jones and Elijah Moore?
Peoples-Jones was actually good. He was one of the most consistent receivers in football last year. Billy, I mean, sorry, habit. Bradley, I know you're really good with your weekly rankings and fantasy pros and whatnot. There was this span of like 6 to 8 weeks where Peoples-Jones was finishing as in the wide receiver 30 range every week, so he was pretty consistent. It's David Bell who probably will be relegated to wide receiver 4 there, and like you mentioned with David Njoku, really at best you're talking about the 5th option. Be interesting to see if they get second running back in there, because they haven't thrown a lot of passes to Nick Chubb in that offense, and I don't think that's going to change. They'll probably end up getting a more complimentary satellite back in there, but I think it'll be the main thing for me is I expect Moore will be one of the top 3 options with Peoples-Jones and Amari Cooper. It'll be how often they utilize each guy in the slot.
All right, we'll continue moving on to the Jets. Yeah, they made that trade with Cleveland. They get that 2nd round pick, but they also have been active in free agency, signing Mecole Hardman and Allen Lazard. Aaron Rodgers has declared his intentions to be traded from the Green Bay Packers to the New York Jets. It hasn't come to fruition yet. Rodgers has come out and said the Packers and Jets are working on compensation. What % chance do you think this deal doesn't get done between Rodgers and or between the Jets and the Packers? I think it's almost a done deal, but what is because it's not 0. Like, there's got to be some % chance that the deal doesn't happen.
Well, of course, these things can everything can fall through, but where's the leverage now? I mean, Rodgers has already come out and made it obvious with his actions that he didn't really want to be there. He's been upset ever since they drafted Jordan Love, seemingly. And then you have, on top of that, a pretty inefficient year, at least by his standards last year. And then, his behavior. It's juxtaposing the whole Brett Favre thing where, we have this veteran quarterback who's been there forever. He ends up going to the Jets. I think Brett Favre only cost the Jets 4th round pick. Now, of course, it's going back, 20 years or whatever. And it seems like Green Bay is holding out for a lot more, which, that's their prerogative. I get it. But another thing that's interesting to me is that it feels like in time, like Brett Favre, Aaron Rodgers is just becoming more and more unlikable. It feels like everything with this team, it's just kind of wait and see. And the Jets have kind of rolled off the red carpet. They signed Allen Lazard, who I think, obviously has that rapport with Rodgers and is fine as a wide receiver 1/2 with Garrett Wilson, but it just remains to be seen. With compensation wise, I figure they're going to get it done because the Packers, I don't see how they have much leverage here. They pretty much have to do it. So I'm sure the Jets, they just got an extra 2nd rounder. So, it feels like that, makes sense to be part of the compensation, for to get this deal done. And until it does, it's kind of a wait and see. Like, it wouldn't surprise me to see the Jets just be, acting like they're going to start looking at the rookies in this class, or maybe to sign another veteran.
Or even there's been some rumors of trading for Matthew Stafford. There have been rumblings out of the Los Angeles Rams that Stafford is softly on the trading block. So if they miss
sense from a Rams standpoint, because in my opinion, the Rams just need to tear it all down. I mean, yeah, listen, you sold all out and you did what you were supposed to. You won that Super Bowl, and if I'm a Rams fan, I'll happily take that one ring. And if they end up having to be terrible for a while, that's the way it is. I mean, that makes sense, but I hadn't really actually heard that.
Yeah, that was just rumblings and rumors, but we'll see if anything really comes to fruition for that. We're waiting with bated breath as the Packers fan. you know, I I feel torn about the Jordan Love thing because I feel like the guy deserves to get, his stars and have some time to be able. He's sat behind Rodgers for 3 years. He finally had a good sample of games last year. Like, I think he's ended up being 9th or 11th in PFF passer
Yeah,
grade and like the 20
eerily,
dropbacks.
it's eerily similar to the same situation with Rodgers and Favre. Really weird.
So I hope that Love like gets his opportunity. But it's also like it's been this saga for 3 years that Rodgers has been upset with the organization and that Gutekunst has uh, messed up or uh, just had trouble with managing this team, or they made some really stupid picks, in my opinion, about the draft picks or trying to compliment Rodgers when they have a Super Bowl contending team, and it just falls short. Like, you know, uh, so I think that it's left a sour taste in my mouth as a Packers fan of, this is all centered around Jordan Love, and maybe it's not Love's fault at all in himself, but the fact that he was the center of all of that has been tough to swallow. But we'll see what happens with that. There have been other trades though that have happened, and one of the bigger ones, Jody, was that Brandon Cooks was traded from the Houston Texans to the Dallas Cowboys in exchange for what? A 5th round and a 6th round pick in consecutive years. So,
And the Texans are picking up $6 million of his salary too.
that's not too bad of a deal.
Not
For
the Cowboys.
not a bad deal for the Cowboys, but you also have to scratch your head and wonder, like, why couldn't they got it done with Amari Cooper? Did Amari Cooper really rub everyone the wrong way? Like, there were rumors at the end of the 2021 season that Cooper and Dak like weren't getting along anymore, and maybe that had facilitated the trade. But Brandon Cooks has to be an upgrade over Michael Gallup or Noah Brown, right?
Oh, well, for sure. A motivated Brandon Cooks. He actually had a couple of 1,000-yard seasons for the Texans. I mean, this is a guy, despite the fact that he's been traded so many times throughout his career, he's been really, really productive as a pro. He has that label of being injury prone, but it's simply not true. You look back, he's been really, really healthy over the years. He missed a game or two last year, but that was more of a disgruntled situation where he was away from the team. And every year, Bradley, every summer, we talk about Brandon Cooks. He's always seems to be a value. Now,
Undervalued.
That might not be the case this year, because anytime the Cowboys make moves, that they're one of them teams that they have such a diverse and huge fan base that whenever they make a move, those players tend to shoot up a round or two, maybe even 3 rounds. But it'll be interesting. I think he's a significant upgrade. He's clearly their number 2 option now. I think at this point, it feels like the Cowboys will probably rotate their tight ends. They did that a little bit last year. They ran some 12 sets, but they probably won't do that so much this year. But Michael Gallup, he's 92% of his routes have come from the perimeter, and CeeDee Lamb, 63% of his for front of the slot. So I anticipate that Brandon Cooks will be that wide receiver 2 for them, and that most of his routes will come from the perimeter. I think 75% of his routes last year in Houston came from outside. He's kind of labeled as a slot guy. He's versatile enough where he can do both. But I think it's a great move for the Cowboys. To me, it was a pretty savvy trade because they got Houston to pick up a pretty significant portion of his salary. And then I believe it was today that they actually renegotiated a contract, put it more of a signing bonus. So it's a really good value for them. So I like it overall for both Cooks and for the Cowboys.
Yeah, I think this is going to bump up. I agree with you. His ADP before this trade, Cooks was in the wide receiver 40s, and I anticipate he'll get into that wide receiver 30s by the midsummer. I think that's where he'll settle. And last year, despite only having like 600 receiving yards and 3 receiving touchdowns, Cooks was 30th among wide receivers. I think it was 32nd, 33rd in PFF receiving grade. He was like 33rd in yards per route run. So he was still like a mid-pack wide receiver 3 in our rankings and in the peripheral statistics. So I think that those are going to be important for us to look at comparing him to the Michael Gallups, who was literally dead last among all wide receivers with 80 or more targets and yards per route run. So it's a significant upgrade, as you mentioned. And with Noah Brown gone, like Noah Brown tied Michael Gallup in targets, only behind CeeDee Lamb, among wide receivers. So I agree with you. I think Cooks is going to get his probably 22 to 24% target share on a better offense. You're going to see more touchdowns, more yards. So, and he'll get the Dallas Cowboys bump in fantasy this year. So, and probably not too hard to stack with Dak and CD as you're like going through your best ball drafts, your offseason best ball drafts. But that's not the only move that the Dallas Cowboys have made of significance. Ezekiel Elliott was released by the Cowboys, designated post June 1st. And so that's going to affect the contract situation. And there have been rumors about Ezekiel Elliott landing in different places. He's given his wish list. Philly has come out and said that they actually don't want him. They're happy with their running back room. But the Cincinnati Bengals and the New York Jets are also on that list. It's a wish list. If you're picking any of these, Jody, what do you think would be the best landing spot for Ezekiel Elliott?
I wouldn't count out him not drumming up much interest and end up re-signing for like a veteran minimum deal with Dallas. Now I know, they did sign Ronald Jones, but I mean, come on, Ronald Jones, he hadn't done anything last year. He was pretty much an empty uniform. But to me, unless he is able to go to a team that's going to have a lot of time spent on a goal line, that's about the only value that Zeke has last year. Touchdowns have been carrying his fantasy value for years, and especially last year, he had 12 rushing touchdowns, I want to say, and he still finished outside the top 20 running backs. And listen, he looks cooked to me. I mean, he was a dynamic running back the first few years, but I think even though he stayed healthy, maybe all that wear and tear has just worn on him. He's declined as both a runner and a receiver for 4 straight years. Last year was Pro Football Focus running back 60 graded. He was 77th in breakaway rate, 106th in their elusive rating. And this is a guy that's, well past his prime, despite the fact that, when it comes to his age, he shouldn't necessarily be broken down. But, I can't really think of, unless the Bengals are willing to move away from Joe Mixon, and there's been plenty of rumors that they're doing that. And Zeke can land, starting spot there. I guess maybe he can still resurrect his fantasy value and come in as a, an RB3, but you mentioned the Jets. I don't like that landing spot at all. I mean, all of us want to see Breece Hall come back. It's concerned obviously with the ACL, but you also have Michael Carter there in New York. I think that they're just fine. So that's not necessarily a spot that I want to see him land. And other than that, it's really hard to envision Elliott, unless he ends up, how much Jerry Jones loves him, unless they end up deciding to bury the hatchet and come back as a more team-friendly deal, and they can work out that whole situation they had last year, then, it's not someone I have much interest in.
Yeah, right now he's going round 11, round 12, round 13 in the best ball drafts. So the market is pretty low on Ezekiel Elliott. You spoke about Breece Hall on the Jets. He tweeted out, he was like, "Don't come here, Zeke," essentially. But then he deleted the tweet. So
yeah, someone from the team probably is like, "Hey, Aaron Rodgers is asking for Zeke now too, so chill out with that."
Yeah, Rodgers is asking for Odell Beckham. He's asking for, I don't know. It could be a
Donald Driver.
Yeah, is Jordy Nelson coming off his farm to catch some passes in New York?
Jeff Janis, bring back the whole crew.
All right. Well, we've got some signings. Maybe before the Damian Harris signing, I was thinking Ezekiel Elliott might be able to land there and have some fancy relevance, but instead the Bills signed Damian Harris. I think this is a great signing. It's probably going to take a lot of goal line pressure off of Josh Allen between the tackles. We saw last year Josh Allen running a lot between the tackles, a lot more than what us fantasy managers are comfortable with. And if we aren't comfortable with it, you have to wonder if the coaches are also not super comfortable with it. But Damian Harris can tote the rock. Back in 2021, one of the highest breakaway run rates in the NFL, double-digit touchdowns. We saw that on a Patriots team that wasn't particularly good. But the Bills also signed Deontay Hardy. I think this is one of the most underrated signings among wide receivers. He was top 10 in yards per route run and top 10 in PFF receiving grade in 2021 for the New Orleans Saints, but he had an injury-ridden 2022 campaign. Jody, what is your reaction to Damian Harris and Deontay Hardy signing with the Buffalo Bills?
I'm okay with Harris. You mentioned 2 years ago, he punched in 15 touchdowns. So this is a guy, he's quite effective when it comes to short yards. At least he was just 2 years ago. He's kind of battled injuries a little bit here and there. It's kind of hard to take away too much from last year's New England team because this was a disaster with Bill Belichick once again outsmarting himself, thinking he could put defensive coordinators or failed head coaches that come from the defensive side of the ball that they could, under his tutelage, that they could be effective play callers. And, that worked out about as disastrously as we all thought it would. But still, like you mentioned with Harris, he does have some breakaway ability. He's also pretty solid in tackle breaking. He's shown some wiggle. And even though they didn't throw a lot of targets his way, he's, I guess, adequate in that range. I know he had some drops and all that, but that became to me more of a situation of just the way New England distributed the ball last year. But, I guess concern would be going from New England's 20th ranked run blocking line to Buffalo's 28th ranked run blocking line. I mean, that's not great, but I do agree that they should take some of the short yardage punishment away from Josh Allen if they expect to keep him, healthy, because Josh Allen, boy, you see him running down the field and he's not the kind of guy that gingerly goes out of bounds and avoids contacts and slides a lot. He's a guy that, you have to fear for the way he just plays the game. You have to watch it, but you have to fear for it from a fantasy perspective. And I think Harris can come in there and be the thunder to the James Cooks and the lightning part of it as more of a receiver. So I like that signing too, and it didn't cost them very much at all. But the other one you mentioned, Deontay Hardy, I think, Bradley, correct me if I'm wrong, I tweeted something last summer about, because I was looking at Pro Football Focus's numbers, and Deontay Hardy just popped in 2021, which you mentioned. He 15.8 yards per game. He was Pro Football Focus wide receiver 7 that year, and it was on 57 targets. So this wasn't like a small 9.
It was a good enough sample.
Yeah, exactly. And look at it. They signed him to 2 years, $13.5 million. That's a pretty that's a pretty decent amount of money. That tells me that they intend to work him into the game. He's got that deep element. It's kind of been missing from the Bills' offense, at least from a consistency standpoint. Gabe Davis was a little disappointing last year, so it's not like the wide receiver 2 job is out of range. And they brought in Trent Sherfield. He's okay. He's a guy that I think can mix in as a slot receiver. But the way Buffalo's offense runs, I think Deontay Hardy, very, very interesting. He's shown in 2021 that he can be a player. Now he's going to play with clearly the best quarterback that he's ever played with in his career. And 2 years, $13.5 million, quite a significant portion of it is guaranteed money. So I think they have plans for him. And I really, really like him right now. As low as his ADP is, he's basically free at the end of drafts.
Yeah, before the signing, he was wide receiver like 140. Now he's jumped up to wide receiver 91. I still think that's too low.
It's still a bargain.
For best ball, like all you need is 3 games where he goes off during the season. And if you're stacking with Josh Allen at the end of the, you might be stacking the number 2 wide receiver for the Buffalo Bills at wide receiver 90 at pick 224. We're talking like round 19.
Well, remember how high Gabe Davis was last year. He's a little polarizing because of the recency bias with that 4 touchdown playoff game.
Right.
Clearly, things didn't work out too great. So I'm not necessarily predicting Hardy to take over that role, but I think the opportunities there that if Davis continues to kind of struggle, Again, 15.8 yards per catch a couple of years ago. The guy can get downfield, and he's got that element, that's kind of missing in Buffalo offense right now.
He's got lots of speed, but he's very tiny. For those not familiar with Deontay Harty, he's formerly Deontay Harris, who changed his name a little over a year ago to honor, I think it was a father figure in his life. And then, as we mentioned, he missed most of the 2022 season, but a dynamic player, 5'7", very, very tiny dude, but he's fast, he's dynamic, he's really good at catching the football. So consider Deontay Harty late in your drafts, especially if you're taking Josh Allen early. We'll move away from Buffalo and into the Houston Texans backfield. Devin Singletary signs with the Texans. It's going to rival Dameon Pierce here. I think there's going to be some competition or split carries. And Dalton Schultz also signs with the Texans. That was one of the biggest tight end is on the free agent market, along with Noah Brown, who played a lot on the outside. And as mentioned earlier in the podcast, tied Michael Gallup in targets, second only behind CD Lamb last year. So Singletary, Schultz, Noah Brown all signed with the Texans. What's your reaction to these three free agents signing with Houston, your hometown team?
From a perspective of it's kind of clever that the Texans have signed so many one-year deals, because they're in and out on these guys, and if they continue to struggle, they're gone away from them. But it also sets up the possibility for them to receive future compensatory picks in the 2024 draft. So kind of interesting approach. I like the Dalton Schultz signing. Honestly, I think that's going to be a really good landing spot for Schultz. It's a 1-year prove-it deal. He should get peppered with targets. You're talking about a rookie quarterback. We all know that reputation that rookie quarterbacks tend to rely on their tight ends. In particular, we're expecting it's going to be Bryce Young or C.J. Stroud. These are more athletic quarterbacks that aren't necessarily going to be doing a bunch of dump off passes to running backs. So Schultz could be the trusted outlet receiver here. And it's not like the Texans have a very deep receiving core. They clearly have one of the bottom 3 or 5 wide receivers groups in the league right now. And you just traded away your number one guy. So I think Schultz has got a good spot here to approach, tight end 5 to tight end 7 numbers yet again for in this offense. And like I said, I really like the landing spot. Singletary, good value, 1 year, $3.75 million. That's kind of surprisingly low to me. I don't know how they're going to use him though. See, Devin Singletary, he's had 3 years in a row where he's had 50 plus targets, but he's been really inefficient in that part of the game. Interestingly, looking at Pro Football Focus yet again, Singletary was the 3rd worst running back in terms of 10 plus targets. He was ranked 87 of the 89 running backs that got 10 plus targets last year. Pro Football Focus graded him, like I said, 3rd worst in their receiving grade. Yet, again, 3 consecutive seasons with 50 plus targets, and we're expecting with Dameon Pierce that the Texans are going to utilize 2 running backs. It's something that came from San Francisco. Obviously, they are known for completely utilizing multiple backs all the time. But expectations are Singletary would probably, be the change of pace guy. Maybe take 1/3 of the carries and most of the receiving work. So that remains to be seen how that plays out. I mean, it's a pretty low risk signing for the Texans, but from a fantasy perspective, I think Singletary is good enough as a runner to where he can eat into Dameon Pierce's role just a little bit, where I'd be a little hesitant with Pierce at this point. I still like him overall as a talent, as a fantasy option, but you could justify if you had him grouped in a tier with 2 or 3 other guys, maybe you could justify looking the other way. And Noah Brown, 84% of his routes last year came from the outside. That role is now going to Brandon Cooks. Oddly, it's like they swap places, but Noah Brown's not. He's 27, 28 now. He's really never done much other than this year, and he's not someone that really moves the needle for me. At best case scenario, I think he moves into their wide receiver 3 role behind Nico Collins. And I actually like John Mechie. That's another guy that's going really late that, I think we're all rooting for after the adversity he faced in his lost rookie year. So going back to Mechie, I think we all kind of really liked him coming out of college too. So I don't know when this offense behind Schultz and Collins, and I'm projecting Mechie to be their wide receiver 2. I don't know how many targets there will be for Noah Brown, but like I said, it's a pretty low risk signing for the Texans.
I agree. Low risk signing, and those are the types of signings that right now, like the Texans still don't mind being bad for 2023. It's when they get their quarterback and they get other pieces eventually that will build around them. And as you mentioned, the compensatory picks of the players that maybe they don't want to bring back. But all of that is going to accumulate. You mentioned Dameon Pierce earlier and his role. Right now, he's going as running back 18 on Underdog, which I think that's way too high. I think more like running back 28 to 30 should be where Dameon Pierce is after this Singletary signing. Now, if the Texans had trusted that Singletary trusted Dameon Pierce and said, you know what, we're not going to draft really anybody of significance. We're not going to, sign anyone of significance. I just think that Singletary is enough of a thorn in Pierce's side to cut off the ceiling games and also eat enough into the floor of, instead of getting 20 carries a game, Dameon Pierce is more likely to get 13, 14, 15, maybe as a ceiling, So that's my concern, is that essentially Dameon Pierce is decapitated by this Singletary signing.
And another thing, I don't expect this to happen, but 12. So Houston's second pick is 12 in this round. That's right around where, we could start seeing Bijan Robinson. I actually expect him to actually be gone by then. I got a mock draft that's about to come out. That'll be interesting, but I don't think they're going to do it. I think that they're after they take a quarterback, I think they're going to look at on the defensive side of the ball, but it can't be ruled out. And if that's the case, then obviously it's complete 180 for the entire backfield.
Absolutely. That would completely turn it on its head. I've seen at that 12 spot, mostly the Texans drafting another wide receiver, whether it is Smith and Jigba or Quentin Johnston or someone else, because we've seen that in the past where we've seen quarterbacks drafted and then like the Joe Burrow and T Higgins, pairing, so we'll see if that's the formula that the Texans take, because as you mentioned, like the wide receiver room is unimpressive. Nico Collins is an underperforming wide receiver. John Mechie has a lot of questions and is coming off of, as you mentioned, a lot of adversity with the torn ACL plus the cancer. And there's Chris Moore and Amari Rodgers is a flame out from Green Bay, a former 3rd round pick. So, I think that this is as significant of a signing as we're going to see. But maybe, they do address the running back position later on with maybe a day 2 or day 3 pick.
How about a Stroud, Smith and Jigba reunion? That'd be interesting.
It'd be very interesting. I also am wondering if the Bears are going to be drafting Smith and Jigba. That's another consideration landing spot. Either the Texans, if they get
you're
Stroud.
talking about 2 of the thinnest rosters in football. They have needs all over the field. So at that point, you can argue, except for, kicker and punter, you can pretty much argue every position makes sense for those teams.
Reuniting Justin Fields with one of his favorite receivers. We'll keep going with the signing of Adam Thielen and Miles Sanders in Carolina. Thielen was cut from the Vikings, of course, after having many good years with the Vikings, but we'd seen signs of slowing down. It seemed like he was at that age cliff, just cratering, the yards per route run taking a significant hit, the PFF receiving grade taking a significant hit, not having the touchdowns that we thought. And, that efficiency was really hurting Thielen. But, there's not, as you mentioned, not a lot of targets. in Carolina with DJ Moore now traded out. So maybe there's a little bit of bounce back with the volume, but I think that's the only argument for Thielen. I'm not sure it's that strong of a one if he's really fallen off the cliff.
Oh, well, I mean, he's been tumbling for a while. He's declined, his efficiency's declined 4 consecutive seasons. Bottomed out last year. Pro Football Focus again, he was their wide receiver 90. He was 129th in yards per route run, 184th, wide receiver 184 in yards after catch per reception. These are all terrible, metrics. And this is a guy who, it sounds like he's a slot receiver. Well, only 33% of Thielen's routes last year actually came from the slot. So he turns 33 before this season even starts, and now you're going from a potent Minnesota offense. You're going to Carolina, who's going to be another team trotting out a rookie quarterback. I don't get this contract at all. They basically gave him the same contract, 3 years, $25 million that Juju Smith-Schuster signed. And, again, Smith-Schuster's been a proven receiver, and he's still in his, about to hit his prime, whereas Thielen is clearly lost more than a step and is on the downward slopes of his career. He's going to a rebuilding team. I don't get it at all.
Yeah, this is one of those age cliff, big-bodied receiver fall off. Like Brandon Marshall, comes to mind. I just, we see just at 1 year, boom, he's done. And it's wild. You mentioned this contract, $25 million over 3 years, but $14 million of it is guaranteed money, Jody. $14 million. That's wild to me that he's 32, right? So yeah, that signing doesn't make sense, but I'm more bullish on the Miles Sanders signing with Carolina. I think that he's going to get volume. He's reuniting with Staley, Deuce Staley, right, in Carolina, who was brought over. And I'm really impressed. I'll take an aside here, not to talk fantasy for a moment, but I'm really impressed with the Carolina Panthers. They brought in a lot of veteran coaches and experienced people on their staff, and hiring Frank Reich and a few other coaches that are well respected in the NFL, and they're here for the long haul. So this trade up for the number 1 pick was one that was, I'm sure, consulted by a lot of these veteran coaches and, signed off by the ownership, that they are here for the long haul for the rebuild, behind this cornerstone pick. So for Miles Sanders, to be here, he's going to get a lot of volume because who else is it there? Chuba Hubbard? That's it.
Yeah, you mentioned Frank Reich. I think Reich I think he's actually a pretty solid coach. I think he got a raw deal in Indianapolis because, look at the quarterbacks he was kind of given to deal with. These guys were all past their prime veterans. Phillip Rivers, Matt Ryan last year could barely even get the ball downfield. Carson Wentz, regressed when he was there in Indy. So we'll see what he can do if he has a say in what they're doing quarterback-wise. But, yeah, Miles Sanders was a little frustrating because I was on him in 2021. And as we all painfully were aware, he went through the entire season and didn't score. Then he comes around last year, and this historic Philadelphia offense is just punching in 2 or 3 touchdowns every week. But what gives me room for optimism with the Panthers is that they won't rotate backs as much as the Eagles did, where they walked Boston Scott, Kenneth Gainwell, Miles Sanders were, all got significant playing time. While Sanders wasn't utilized much as a receiver the last 2 or 3 years in Philadelphia, in his rookie year, he did catch 50 passes. So he looked good in that role, if I remember correctly. So, obviously the run blocking line goes from 3rd best in Philadelphia down to 22nd for Carolina. But the touches should be there. I think Sanders probably will be a little more involved as a pass catcher. The Panthers obviously lost Deontay Foreman as well. So I think Chuba Hubbard will probably be that change of pace guy. He looked pretty good in that role last year. So if Sanders can get 2/3 of the carries for a team that's going to be utilizing their ground game a little differently under Frank Reich, I'm optimistic that he can approach last year's fantasy numbers.
Yeah, maybe not as many touchdowns, but you'd think increased volume and a little bit more in the passing game could balance that out a bit. You mentioned Donta Foreman. This is almost like we've woven this in pretty well, Jody, right? Donta Foreman signed a 1-year, $3 million deal with the Chicago Bears. And Robert Tonyan also signed with the Bears. The Bears also acquired DJ Moore in the trade for the 101. So there's been some shifts in Chicago. Do you think that the Bears have done enough for right now to compete for the NFC North?
No, clearly not. You got the Lions. You're getting better in that division. The Packers, despite the fact that the Green Bay fell off last year, they're still significantly, better than the Bears. They still need to do more. They need to get Justin Fields weapons. I mean, that receiving core that Chicago trotted out last year was just an embarrassment. DJ Moore, clearly one of the favorites in fantasy football. That was a big step in the right direction, and I think that Justin Fields stays healthy without taking all that punishment. Then DJ Moore and him can build up quite a rapport. Foreman, I like the signing 1 year, $3 million, very little risk. And he ran for 914 yards and 5 scores last year, but he only had 9 targets. So, clearly this will be Khalil Herbert's backfield. I keep mentioning, these committees and these change of pace roles. But again, there's no reason to think that, you have a mobile quarterback in Justin Fields. They typically don't throw a lot of passes to their running backs. And, Foreman, again, last year, despite the fact that he was on the field a lot, only had 9 targets. So, clearly teams don't necessarily view him as that kind of option. So, and the Tonyan signing, and I don't know what they're doing there. You already have a really good tight end there. Maybe they're thinking, hey, we ain't got any wide receivers. Let's just go to a 12 all the time. But Robert Tonyan's not that. I mean, he's going to go down as one of the biggest flukish fantasy guys in history with that really weird 11 touchdown season in 2020. After that, he's followed up with a tight end 32 performance. And then last year, tight end 19. And that was with Aaron Rodgers. You're going to Justin Fields, who, I think the polite way of putting it is very limited still as a passer. And you're going to an offense that, it's complete redo when it comes to, the receiving core and whatnot. So to me, Robert Tonyan's not even on my, on the fantasy radar. He's, I don't see how he'll end up even being a top 30, top 25 tight end. He's no interest.
No interest in Robert Tonyan. Many years ago, well, not that many, but a couple years ago, I called that Tonyan breakout, and it was pretty wild.
Wow.
Yeah, that's why. Well, Billy got me the jersey, and so that was a lot of fun. But I agree with you. There's some steps that the Bears need to take still for them to significantly or seriously compete for that division title. Fields needs to improve as a passer. He's one of the worst PFF graded passers last year, which is kind of wild to think that he was one of the best in the NCAA coming out of college for Ohio State. But now he falls, you wonder how badly Matt Nagy has messed him up, how much the coaches didn't trust him to throw year 2. Because if you remember, for the first 4 games or so, he didn't throw more than 20 passes.
Right.
So, like, that's a problem. But now you've got DJ Moore. Hopefully, you can the Bears can pick up some receiving help in the draft. Darnell Mooney should be back, and Mooney's one of the most efficient wide receivers out there. He'll command some targets. He's a deep threat. The Tonyan signing did puzzle me when you have Cole Kmet. But Cole Kmet, he needs to be even lower. And since the Tonyan trade, like, he had gone from tight end 13 to tight end 12. So I don't know how that helps, which is wild to me. But also, to go back to the running back situation, I think that these 2 running backs are going to be really efficient. Foreman and Khalil Herbert. Foreman right now is running back 42 on Underdog, and Khalil Herbert is running back 30. I think it's, going to be closer than that when it's all said and done. But with Justin Fields on the field and if Foreman and Herbert can rotate in, split pretty close to 50-50, I think both of them are a pretty nice deal if you've got some open lanes and Justin Fields is still going to be rushing. All right. We'll keep her rolling with an underrated signing, I think, and Gardner Minshew goes to the Colts. This doesn't preclude the Colts, of course, from drafting a quarterback, but what is the likelihood that Indianapolis will undergo Minshew mania in 2023, Jody?
I think it's all about who or what they do in this draft. From a standpoint, I think it's a brilliant signing. It's only 3.5 million.
Yeah, $3.5 million. That's it.
That's nothing for a quarterback. And Minshew, he's only 26. At least from a fantasy perspective, he's come in and been a pretty reliable option. As you'll recall, he had a couple of starts last year. One of them was really good, one of them not so much. But I think it's a perfect landing spot for him to potentially mentor whoever the Colts decide to draft at 4. In particular, if they decide to roll the dice and go with Anthony Richardson, who dynamic athlete. Obviously, we've seen the upside. He draws the comps to anywhere from a Cam Newton to a Lamar Jackson as a potential athlete. But clearly, when you watch films, there's a lot to be desired as a thrower. So they could choose, hey, let's go with the upside, and we'll move him in slowly. We won't. We anticipate we'll have some plays, designed runs and whatnot to mix him in early in his career until he becomes more comfortable. And we feel like Minshew can hold on to Ford until then. So to me, it's a nice little insurance policy. Again, it's very, very cheap. So I like the signing of Minshew all around. He's not, obviously he's not anyone on the fantasy radar. And the scenario I'm playing could completely change if they like Will Levis and decide to go him at 4, or they decide to trade up for Bryce Young or CJ Stroud. At this point, we don't know, clearly what they're going to do. But he's a guy to, maybe in deeper dynasty leagues, you got 28, 30 rosters, super flex leagues. You can think about, keeping him on the radar, see how things turn out this summer.
Yeah, I mean, this is a natural fit here for the Colts. Shane Steichen, the new head coach for the Indianapolis Colts, was the offensive coordinator for the Philadelphia Eagles, and bringing over Minshew, who backed up Gardner Minshew, who backed up Jalen Hurts last year. Got a couple spot starts, as you mentioned, Jody, but it was also a really effective quarterback his rookie year for Jacksonville. So he has a track record of quality production. He's mobile enough. He's not a rushing quarterback, but he's mobile enough in the pocket. He makes good decisions generally. And I think this is a pretty safe pick for the Colts. Either be a bridge to 2024, like hashtag capitulate for Caleb, or or maybe, they find a diamond in the rough with Gardner Minshew of getting a real starting spot here in Indy. So either way, I think it's a good signing. And doesn't preclude the Colts from drafting a quarterback, as you mentioned. We've got a couple more here, but want to take a moment. Make sure you're following Jody at Jody Smith NFL on Twitter. You can follow myself at FF Stalder. And we are, working our way through some of the free agency transactions that have happened over the last couple weeks. Make sure you're subscribed on the Full-Time Fantasy Podcast YouTube channel, and send us DMs if you want to talk with us more later. And of course, check out the Full-Time Fantasy website and the FFWC. Of course, I think they've got some I'm
always in Discord, so you can hit me up there too.
Some way too early drafts, best ball drafts are available there too, and so if those are available in your state, you want to hop in there for sure. All right. We've got a couple more, some updated transactions. The Giants just can't help themselves, Jody. They must They must sign every slot receiver that exists in the free agent market. They've signed Shepard. They've signed Campbell. They've signed Crowder. They've traded for slot tight end Darren Waller. And of course, they have Wan'Dale Robinson, the rookie from last year. Slot receiver. He's like, what, 5'8"? So they love their slot receivers. Darius Slayton is the only re-signing of, an outside wide receiver. What are we to like? How are we supposed to interpret signing almost all of the same types of players? Does this indicate that Wan'Dale is not ready? Does this indicate that Sterling Shepard is not ready? Or is this just plain insurance?
It feels like they're just out searching for value, or maybe they're typecast. They just like these versatile guys, or these guys that can line up, inside. That we'll figure out how to make them be perimeter options. I don't really know. Or I like the Darren Waller trade. It didn't cost them much, only a 3rd round pick, and you're getting, a guy who's proven to be on a week to week basis, a top 3, top 5 tight end. I question if they're going to have enough of a credible passing game to keep all of these guys involved. But for what they're paying Slayton, have to think that obviously, he's viewed as their wide receiver 1. Darren Waller will actually be the wide receiver 1, but Slayton will be up there as a wide receiver 2. Paris Campbell, interesting, 80-something% of his routes last year for the Colts were in the slot, and then 1 year, $3 million. I don't really know what to think of this situation. Also have Isaiah Hodgins, who had his moments last year. Jamison Crowder, they just signed him today. I don't anticipate that he's going to mix in much. But Bradley, you did just ask, is it concern for Wan'Dale? Like, well, it must be, because I actually got a dynasty offer of someone trying to sell off Wan'Dale Robinson pretty cheaply today, which is kind of interesting considering how much we all liked him, I think, in fantasy wise last year. So this is
I have an embarrassing amount of Wan'Dale Robinson in Dynasty, for what it's worth. Like, like really bad, Jody.
Well, not to be embarrassed about. We don't really want to get rid of guys until maybe year 2 or 3. Then you can start. Not after 1 year. After 2 down years, Elijah Moore, I'm thinking about you. That's when we can start thinking about, okay, what are we doing with this guy? But it's a situation that, I would avoid. I think for now, I just don't know how these guys are going to use. It's kind of like, like I said, it's like they're typecast, the same type of guys, and how are they going to fit them into this role? And this is going to be with Danny Dimes, he's not a quarterback that as a thrower that I want, to invest too much stock in. A huge portion of his fantasy value comes from his legs. So, I've questioned if there's going to be enough balls for, any of these guys to really, other than Waller, to really make a big impact.
Yeah, I agree with you. Waller is the one that really sticks out to me still. A 3rd round pick is significant draft capital. That was the same pick that was used to trade away Kadarius Toney, that the Chiefs used to acquire Toney. So, it's essentially Darren Waller minus a year plus for Kadarius Toney. But I agree. I think Waller is the pick here among those receiving options. We'll move to the Saints, and the Saints signed running back Jamal Williams away from the Detroit Lions. Remember, Williams set the Lions franchise record, broke Barry Sanders' record for rushing touchdowns. He converted 12, 13 1-yard scores. It was kind of ridiculous, but he was the battering ram. And you have to wonder if he's going to be relied upon in that type of role here, or if he's going to have a more significant role with a pending Alvin Kamara suspension. This was, from what we understand, what we're hearing, and maybe we're wrong, maybe the reports are wrong, but this was less money than what the Detroit Lions were offering to Jamal Williams, and this was less than what the Lions gave to David Montgomery. So what do we make of this signing with the Saints, Jody?
Yeah, it's a great value acquisition for the Saints. 3 years, 12 million. That's for a running back that just ran for 1,066 yards and 17 touchdowns. That feels like hitting a lotto. But that's just the current landscape for running backs in today's NFL. I really like the signing for Williams as more than just an insurance policy for Alvin Kamara. They were given 8 to 10 touches opportunities a week to Mark Ingram, even when Kamara was back there last year. And Mark Ingram's been done for a year or two here. So Jamal Williams clearly when it comes to what he's done over the last couple of years as Detroit, he's got the capability to be, I think, a 3-down back if Kamara is sidelined. In Green Bay, Jamal Williams had a couple of seasons in a row where he caught 30-plus balls. It's not really an issue. I know they didn't throw him a lot of passes the last couple of years for the Lions, but he can catch just fine. It's not necessarily a weakness for him. It all comes down to what's going to happen to Kamara, and hopefully there's some resolution of that before drafts really start kicking off and whatnot. But with Derek Carr, it's a big upgrade at quarterback for the Saints. It remains to be seen what they're going to do with Taysom Hill. It sounds like they fully expect to continue using him, and considering his contract, that would make sense. So that could potentially take away from some of the short yardage opportunities. But overall, to me, it's a lot to like for the Saints. Like I said, I think it was a really savvy investment for them. And in particular, if we're all kind of, I think, anticipating that Kamara is going to be sidelined. Bradley, what do you think is the safety line for a kid like yourself that's fixing to start doing projections? If you haven't already, I mean, I'm kind of looking at it as I'm penciling him out for 6 games at this point, because it sounds like the suspension could be 4, could be 8. Of course, it could be 0. I mean, there's always a way that things can get resolved, but that's the way I'm looking at it personally right now.
Yeah, I think 6 games is what a lot of people are projecting for right now. We saw the video; it doesn't look very good. And anytime that you have video or you have audio or you have some way in which the public sees you, that's what I was talking about with the last year, the Deshaun Watson situation. Obviously, there's a lot of personal testimony from that side, but we didn't see video. We didn't get audio, and he only got suspended for 11 games, and so these are obviously very different situations. And level of depth and everything. But because there is video, like that is what I think can get Alvin Kamara on the higher side of any potential suspension. So as you're going through that, I mean, Kamara, his ADP is dropping every day. Right now, Alvin Kamara, running back 33, he's being drafted outside the top 100 of running backs. And I think that'll continue to fall. I've seen him get into the early running back 40s in some drafts because, people are just afraid of him. But at some point you have to say, there's an inflection point of value. So, I think that's going to be, unfortunately, Jamal Williams just offers no upside. Like, he's not an efficient running back. You mentioned that he doesn't catch passes a lot or hasn't done so lately. And you have to wonder if Derek Carr is going to throw it more to the Juwan Johnsons of the world, and the Chris Olaves and the Rashid Shaheeds. And the Saints also re-signed Michael Thomas. And Thomas right now is being drafted as the wide receiver 49, even though he's always been a 24 to 28% target share type of wide receiver. So I think that Alvin Kamara and Jamal Williams situation is one that I'm mostly avoiding for right now, unless I got a lot of value. But I'm more bullish, Jody, on Michael Thomas. And maybe I'm just beating a dead horse. Maybe I'm the idiot, the stupid who can't quit. Billy always told us about, you just can't quit it. And I think Michael Thomas is one of those players that I just can't quit. when you're drafting him outside the top 48 of wide receivers, like it feels like an auto smash for Thomas, who's right now, I mentioned wide receiver 49, ADP 101 on Underdog. I can't help myself.
I don't blame you. I mean, I was in a couple of FFWC way too early drafts. I took him in both of them because at that point, like you said, he's outside of the top 100. Yeah, I get, he's 30 or he's about to turn 30. He's getting up there in age, and he's only played 10 games in the last 3 years. I get all that, but look at the 3 he played last year. He was great. He was wide receiver 17 in PPR points per game. So, and this was with what they had at quarterback last year. Derek Carr, it's an upgrade for them. I'm not the biggest Derek Carr fan, but he's an upgrade over what the Saints had last year, and Andy Dalton and Jameis Winston. So,
you had to just throw the Jameis Winston shade in there, didn't you, Jody?
Well, we had a little bet going to summer. I went ahead and called it off because it wasn't really fair. But I was not a believer in Jameis Winston. I thought all of the points that I made were exactly came true, and he was not anyone that I had anything to do with last year. And for him to re-sign with the Saints, it tells you, okay, it's not going to happen again.
There wasn't a market for him, unfortunately. Yeah, I mean, week 1, I was feeling myself, after he had a really nice week 1, and then I don't know, just got injured after a couple weeks, and even when he got healthy, the Saints coaching staff just didn't want him throwing the ball, it was bewildering to me. But he had some good games, some bad games. It's frustrating though that the NFL market just didn't see Jameis Winston be able to hit. So I guess, I have to be out on Winston, unfortunately, Jody. So sorry.
What would you tell you it's time to quit it?
I know I'm quitting it. I'm quitting Jameis Winston this year. Thanks. Okay. So we got a couple more. We'll talk Juju Smith-Schuster and Mike Gesicki signing with New England. Both of these are very low guaranteed money. I think Gesicki was $4.5 million, which for a dynamic player like him, there's another 4.5 in incentives. And then Juju, you mentioned 3 years, 25.5 million or so. Both of them, I don't think Juju is an upgrade for Jacoby Myers, but Mike Gesicki plus Juju, I think gets you more dynamism in that receiving core. And I think also, Jody, and I hope you'll agree with me, this offensive coordinator position will get itself sorted out. You're going to have a more competent offense this year. I think it was Jody, correct me if I'm wrong, but Bill Belichick actually didn't have an official offensive coordinator because he didn't want to pay for one. Like, I don't think that the titles of
to do with if you don't name a coordinator, they don't have to actually speak to the media. That probably is more. I heard somebody explain that one time. So it's all about
maybe it's.
So it might have been his workaround from having to have someone step up and take accountability or speak to.
Well, these players, the coaches, I think, were fired. The previous coaches were fired, and if they were named offensive coordinators, I think that was part of their contract. Was if they took another coordinator job, then the Patriots would have to pay a certain, portion of that contract. So it could be media, it could be contract, whatever. But I think this is an upgrade offensively. All of these things together is going to be better news. I don't know, it's going to be amazing, but it's got to be better than what New England was trotting out last year.
Yeah, you said the word competent a minute ago, and I don't like labeling competent with Bill O'Brien, considering what he did as a quote unquote general manager here for the Texans. But when you look back at his stint as the offensive coordinator in New England, now granted, I know this is going back 11, 12 full seasons ago, but and it was with Tom Brady. But the Patriots were, the number 2 offense in football, number 2 passing offense, and very interesting. You mentioned Jacoby Myers. He was wide receiver 29 last year, even in the decrepit offense they tried to roll out. He was 29th in fantasy points per game. Kind of in that slot role where he took some snaps outside too. Exactly what the kind of situation that I expect for Juju Smith-Schuster. And penciling back to that 2011 season with Bill O'Brien as the offensive coordinator. Slot receiver Wes Welker got 173 targets. Now, of course, are we anticipating Juju Smith-Schuster getting that many? No, but as of right now, he's going to be. I think he's clearly probably their number one receiver. And Gesicki was really an interesting signing for me because, again, in that 2011 Patriots team, they didn't have a lot of receivers. They were just funneling passes to Wes Welker, but they had Aaron Hernandez and they had Rob Gronkowski, who both were 110 plus targets. So Bill O'Brien, if he can circle back and forget all of what's happened in the last decade, if he can look at his roster and he can figure out, hey, Hunter Henry and Mike Gesicki are two best players outside of Smith-Schuster, maybe we'll just run a whole bunch of 12 sets. So sneaky potential, I think, for the Patriots to kind of go back, in that direction, to circle back to what was successful. And, it's all dependent on, if Mac Jones can get over his, regression last year, if they can figure out a way to, get him back on track. There might be some sneaky potential for the Patriots.
Well, we mentioned that Jacoby Myers had left the Patriots, and former Patriot Jimmy Garoppolo and Jacoby Myers both signed with the Raiders. So the Jacoby Myers signing happened, and then the Waller trade happened. So you also have to wonder if there's going to be a movement for Hunter Renfrow, but Renfrow has a significant cap hit this year. So it's Devontae Adams, Jacoby Myers, and for now, Hunter Renfrow in this offense being thrown to by Jimmy Garoppolo. I don't think this move precludes the Raiders either from drafting a quarterback, but Jimmy at least is a stopgap, a pretty solid stopgap for the Raiders, and will keep them competitive. Any takeaways from these two significant signings?
No, I mean, they needed to do something, over there. I think Garoppolo is kind of a similar player, probably not quite as good as Derek Carr. It's not, it's not a significant decline or drop off to me. I thought the contract for Garoppolo was fairly reasonable. I mean, would you rather sign Jimmy Garoppolo to a 2-3 year deal for $25 million a year, or do what the Giants did, which was sign Daniel Jones to $40 million a year? Personally, I'd rather take my chances with Garoppolo. Like I said, he's no great shakes. He's not someone that I think can really long-term answer guide a team, but I think he's simply okay. And right now the Raiders are kind of trying to figure out who they are, and like you said, they won't necessarily be out of the quarterback market. It's not what I expect they're going to do, but it also wouldn't surprise me if so many mock drafts have four quarterbacks in the top 5 picks or whatever, and to me that's kind of crazy. It's very unusual to see 4 quarterbacks in the top 10, much less top 5. So I don't know. I'm still working on my official first mock, which should be out probably by this weekend. But overall, like I said, I think the Raiders are kind of treading water right now, trying to figure out who and what they are, and to me, it just remains to be seen, if this old Patriots cast-offs that they have are going to work, 2,000 miles west.
They've got some Patriots cast-offs when Philip Dorsett signs with the Raiders. That's the case. Jody, we've got just a couple more that we'll hit on, and then we'll call it for tonight. Some of the last ones, Jeff Wilson and Raheem Mostert both re-signed with the Dolphins. Raheem Mostert right now is being drafted as the running back 48. Jeff Wilson is being drafted as the running back 51. So the market has them neck and neck. And I've seen even Jeff Wilson being drafted ahead of Raheem Mostert due to age and due to the draft capital that the Dolphins, traded to acquire him. But, I don't feel bad at all, like waiting on running back in these best ball drafts and drafting both of these guys, because, both of them offer upside. Both of them are familiar with the scheme. We saw spike weeks from both. So, and it's going to be hard to pin down which one I think is going to be the lead back. But if I'm giving a lean, I'm giving it to Jeff Wilson. What do you think?
Yeah, probably about the same. I think they're both really good zero RB targets for as low as they're being selected. What we saw, and neither one of them have a very good track record for staying healthy. So, if you were to have the flexibility to get both of them, well, it's kind of like an insurance policy. There's a pretty good chance that one of them at least is going to get hurt. So if you got the other one, then you're talking about a potential 15 plus touch guy, and if you can get them, like you said, down in that RB 50 range, that's pretty nice for zero RB drafters. And being an old school guy, it's not a policy that or a strategy that I implemented much, but I actually do intend to try, more on that approach this year. I want to try to just load up on wide receivers where I can. The strategy makes sense from that perspective. So these are guys that, if I'm able to do that, and of course, I won't be the only one in the draft. If 7 other people are doing it, then maybe I go back to robust RB. But they're guys that'll be on my radar for the few leagues I'm actually successfully able to try to start zero RB.
Well, we mentioned it earlier that Jamal Williams had signed with the New Orleans Saints and is being replaced now in Detroit by David Montgomery. Montgomery has finished no worse than running back 24 every single season, but he's if you look up the word, efficiency, you're not going to find David Montgomery's name anywhere, close to it. But this guy, I think he can fall into the end zone 10 times, 11 times, 12 times and be fantasy relevant. But also, I like that the ADP is now dropping for DeAndre Swift because of David Montgomery's signing. I really like Swift's upside. And so if, Swift's ADP can continue to drop, I'm a fan of targeting him as a result of this signing. What's your takeaway from the Lions signing David Montgomery to a pretty significant deal?
Yeah, I kind of agree with you here. I don't know that you mentioned in that offense. It's certainly possible that David Montgomery could fall into the end zone 8 or 10 times, but that would make a pretty significant increase for him. He's not a guy that's ever been very efficient in that area of the field. But somebody tweeted the other day, they showed all the plays in his career so far that DeAndre Swift has been tackled at the 1 yard line. And it was kind of eye opening, like, wow, it was a lot. So I don't know. Right now, I mean, I like the Lions. I think we all kind of really like the way that they're going about business, how they rallied around their coach and whatnot. So I think I'm kind of rooting for them. So it would be a lot cooler if they would go with one back versus two. But I agree that for and a guy like me who has several teams with DeAndre Swift on them, I feel like if he continues to creep down a little bit, that he starts to become a little bit of a value. But it remains to be seen to me if they had the same faith around the stripe that they did for Jamal Williams, that they feel like Montgomery can be that kind of guy too. Because again, like I said, he hasn't shown that throughout his career so far. Now he's been on some pretty subpar Bears teams, and when it comes to offensive line struggles, Chicago's knows all about that. So we'll see how that plays out.
All right, the last running back and player we'll talk about tonight before a rapid fire. Talk about the remaining free agents. Rashad Penny signed with the Philadelphia Eagles. There's a lot of questions about Rashad Penny, whether he can stay healthy, whether he will be the main back. It was only a $1.3 million deal, but there's also a lot of love on the timeline because his yards after contact has always been very strong. He has that high draft capital pedigree, but unfortunately just couldn't stay on the field. And the Philadelphia Eagles have Boston Scott and Kenneth Gainwell. So talk to me about this fit of Rashad Penny with the Eagles. And does this, we mentioned at the top of the podcast about how Ezekiel Elliott, might think about wanting to sign there, but the Eagles said, we're good. Do you think that the Eagles could look elsewhere to find another back as well, or draft one at the end of April?
Absolutely. I think the Eagles would be wise to focus on defense. They've lost a lot of key contributors so far this offseason, and I'm sure that's what they'll do early in the draft. But this is a great running back rookie class coming in. It's going to be pretty deep, as we've started seeing over the last few years. Quality running backs are sliding further and further into day 2 and into day 3 in these drafts, and I expect that'll easily be the case here this year. So I do expect the Eagles will add someone else to the mix, and it'll just complicate things. Like everyone else, love Rashad Penny when he's healthy. He's one of the more exciting backs in football to watch. He was keeping Ken Walker at bay last year before he once again got nicked up. Surprisingly low contract, I think, for him. And you worry about Jalen Hurts taking all of those short yardage opportunities away from Penny, because let's pretend that they don't add anyone significant to the backfield, and Penny's able to stay healthy. Well, he could easily take a Miles Sanders leap from 0 touchdowns to 11. I mean, the offense was clicking. If they don't change things, I know you got a new, offensive coordinator and whatnot coming in there. I'm guessing they're going to keep everything else as it was. Penny's the kind of guy, like, I would like to have some of him on some of my teams this year, but it's probably not going to happen too much because as of right now, with the early drafts, it feels like someone's going to take him before I get the opportunity. But it remains to be seen, if they do add someone else. Like I said, I expect they will.
Yeah, I think that there's still an opportunity for another back to jump in there, maybe early day 3, might be a Tyler Algier type of player,
Yeah,
that type of caliber. All right, Jody, that is it for the free agents that have signed. But for those who are remained unsigned, give me one player that you're interested about seeing where they land and why.
Kareem Hunt. I mean, Kareem Hunt in 2 different spots so far in his career has proven that he can be a very viable running back. He's someone that's clearly fantasy significant when he gets the opportunity. We haven't heard a peep out of Kareem Hunt, and that's kind of curious, because it feels like running backs are signing for a lot lower. Bradley, their contracts are going for a lot less money. Look at Rashad Penny, Jamal Williams. These guys that I thought should have probably gotten more money, but they went ahead and just said, "Well, that it is what it is. It's the market. It's just the reality of today's NFL." I don't know if Kareem Hunt's agent sitting back telling him, "Oh man, you're a $5-7 million a year guy. We'll wait, maybe." And of course, also, you said one guy, but we'll throw out what Beckham and DJ Chark. These are all guys that I'm kind of interested in to see, where they land.
I'm interested to find out where DJ Chark lands, because I thought that for a moment maybe he'll re-sign with Detroit, and then there were rumblings that he's visiting the Panthers, but nothing had come of that yet. So I wonder where he lands. There's been some cap clearing in Kansas City. Say that 5 times fast. But yeah, there's been also rumors of DeAndre Hopkins getting traded there, or Odell Beckham signing with the Chiefs, or the Bills being interested in Hopkins or Beckham. There's a lot of rumblings about those players. But I'm really interested in DJ Chark. He had a good season when he was on the field with the Lions last year. It was a good little bounce back year. So I'm interested to find out where he's at. And the other I'm interested in is Irv Smith Jr. Not really a pass blocking tight end, more of that receiving tight end and red zone, end zone threat. But Minnesota moved on from Irv Smith. They traded for TJ Hawkinson, and they signed Josh Oliver to a pretty significant, $21 million deal over 3 years. Talk about like Irv Smith is not going to fit that Josh Oliver mold. But I want to know where Irv Smith lands, that maybe he could be of fantasy relevance yet again. Remember, only a couple years ago, he was a fantasy darling, and a lot of hype was surrounding Irv Smith. But
how about if he just trades places and goes to Detroit? They kind of have an opening for a starter there, don't they? They don't use tight ends a lot, at least not, non-Hawkinson, but that makes sense.
Yeah. So just one thing to follow up on Kareem Hunt, his the Spot Track calculated market value, $7 million for Kareem Hunt. And there's no way that a team's going to pay that, right?
That was just not when you look at what these guys are signing for, not when you look at the market. I mean, are you telling me that Kareem Hunt is worth 6 or 7 times what Rashad Penny was worth? I mean, again, maybe these are the things that his agent's saying, we're going to hold out and wait. Like, oh, okay. But, Kareem Hunt's a player. He can get on the field. 32 teams, I think, could find a role for Kareem Hunt. But maybe that's what it is, because we're not hearing anything.
Yeah, and the issue with Kareem Hunt is that he's coming off a bad year. Like last year for Cleveland, he did not play well. His PFF rush grade was bad. His yards after contact per attempt was bad. His juke rate was low. Like there were just indicators of inefficiency relative to other seasons. But Kareem Hunt, the comps rate here for the contract, Joe Mixon, Leonard Fournette, Hines, and Chase Edmonds, all like significantly paid. But you have to wonder if teams have wised up a little bit and said, you know what, we're not going to overpay for these veteran running backs on who are now onto their third contract. So we'll see. We will see where Kareem Hunt lands and where Ezekiel Elliott lands and where all of the other free agents who've not yet signed. Jody, this has been great catching up with you and chatting some football. Make sure you're following Jody on Twitter at Jody Smith NFL. Jody, any final words for the listeners and viewers?
No, well, as we all know, there's no off season, so we'll see you again here shortly. Next week, maybe the week after. But I'm looking forward to getting into my mock draft and getting all that stuff done once I can get past all this final baseball stuff.
All right. Well, on behalf of Jody, I'm Bradley. You can follow me on Twitter at FFStalder. And yeah, it's been great chatting with you here on the Full Time Fantasy Podcast. And until next time, good luck in the fantasy football streets, everybody.